Looking forward to discuss the question of women in peace and security, its broader context, also because this publication, this book that was just published by Fundação Alexandre Guzmão, the think tank of the Brazilian Foreign Affairs Academy training for diplomats, Rio Branco, Academia Rio Branco, just published the book, which was actually a dissertation during the process of your transition in your career to another level of your career. Can you tell us a little bit about the historical context of women in peace and security at the United Nations?
Sure. So yeah, Maya, the book was originally written in Portuguese as part of our career advancement plan in Brazil. It was written in 2020, beginning of 2021, and the context of our preparation for our last mandate as non-permanent member at the Security Council in 2022 and 2023. And there is not much written in Brazil about the women, peace and security agenda. I was working with that for quite a while when I decided to write about it and to give a contribution, a specific contribution from a country from the global south, when I realized that it was very common for people in Brazil, but especially here in New York, to kind of dismiss the agenda as something that was invented by donor countries for their geopolitical interests. And in reality, the Women, Peace and Security agenda was built by the women's movements, especially international organizations, women organizations. And the building of the agenda is a very interesting one. The development of the idea of the agenda is a very interesting one that dates back to the creation of the United Nations in 1945, when a Brazilian scientist and politician, Dr. Bertolutz, was one of only 6 women who acted as plenipotentiary delegates to the San Francisco conference representing their country. Dr. Bertolutz, who was a feminist back in Brazil, who was fighting for women's vote in Brazil, she had it very clear in her mind that unless women were an active part of the United Nations, including in peace and security matters, that the organization would not fulfill its main objective, that is to avoid another major armed conflict, right? That was the main objective behind the creation of the United Nations back in 1945. And so she had a very important role in including gender equality as part of the UN Charter. And this story is not very well known. We can say that this is a basic step in the women's peace and security agenda, which only became a reality in the year 2000, when Resolution 1325 was finally adopted by the Security Council. One of the main reasons for me to choosing this subject to write on is the fact that I wanted to show people that, well, the use of the agenda for geopolitical reasons is a side effect, if we will, but it was not the real motive or reason for the agenda to come to be. It was a very legitimate call from women, from civil society, and especially from the global south, to have an active role in decision-making, especially in terms of defense, security, and military matters that are so important for everyone's lives. I mean, we're talking about life and death here. And women were just...
Absolutely, yes. And it's interesting that you bring this up, the matter that really is started at the very beginning at the creation of the United Nations. This was a real concern that was put on the table, and it just happened so by a Brazilian diplomat as well, right? So there was a little bit now in terms of the Brazil's intervention at the Security Council. Brazil was part of the non-permanent members of the Security Council, but he was part in 2004 and 2005. And then again in 2010 and 2011. And in 2023, most recently, there was a little bit what was changing over the years every time Brazil was participating more actively in the Security Council conversations.
Sure. So in my, from what the information that I was able to gather, in these first two instances, the first two mandates after Resolution 1325 passed, Brazil, as many other countries, was still a bit silent on this subject. We did not fulfill a very important role in promoting the agenda in these first two mandates, except for a very important episode that is also described in the book. During our presidency in February 2011, Brazil was in the presidency of the Security Council, and there was an important discussion on sexual violence being included as criterion for listing of individuals in sanctions committees. There was a call from the special representative on sexual violence in armed conflict for the Security Council to consider this crime as a basis for the listing of individuals in sanctions committees. And when Brazil was in the presidency of the Security Council, we agreed on having sexual violence as one of the criteria for the listing of individuals. And this is an important episode, being because Brazil is very cautious usually in terms of sanctions and listing and delisting of individuals, even by the Security Council, let alone unilateral measures, but even by the Security Council, which are the only sanctions that we consider to be legitimate in terms of international law, in light of international law. We are still very cautious about the listing of individuals. And to have sexual violence in armed conflict as one of the criteria for the listing of individuals, I think, is an important also episode for us to understand. So we can say that it has been progressively, become more important. And I would say that the last mandate was a turning point. Since the beginning, Brazil decided to join the shared commitments, the Declaration of Shared Commitments on Women, Peace and Security, which is a very interesting initiative, by the way, from elective members. So the E10 leaving a permanent mark in the Security Council. It is usually sad that the E10 leave no permanent mark in the Security Council. I think this initiative proves to the contrary. When you have an organization between the E10, you can leave a permanent mark because the initiative goes on even after the first proponents are out of the council. So I think it's an interesting example. And we also had a chance last October to organize and preside over the annual open debate on WPS that usually happens each October. Last October, it was Brazil who presided over that important meeting. So I think it was a turning point in that regard.
So Brazil became a bit more assertive too since 2004 and 2005 and 2010 as well, right? Because of course the debate of women in peace and security, as you mentioned earlier, it has become of late something that people think, oh, it's just being used as a geopolitical tool, you know, as a chip in bargaining for other considered more important issues that have to be resolved, which is not the case at all. Of course, we know how important it is because women are being sexually exploited, sexually abused, and many other issues too in terms of their participation on the conversations, not only in the Security Council, but within the United Nations as a whole, United Nations offices, regional offices too. The conversation around women's rights and women in peace and security is still always like sort of, oh, you already have achieved so much. You are working at the UN, look at you. So, but that's not the case. We're thinking of the millions of women, half of the entire population, 4 billion plus, that don't have the same rights and those suffer consequences. So tell us a little bit more the contemporary context, what's happening right now.
Absolutely. We could talk about only this last question of yours, Maya, for quite a while. There's so many different layers to what you just said, but I will try to focus on the present challenges because, yes, the book was written in the context of something that has passed already. But if we will, there is a chance to give a contribution also to the upcoming debate on the 25 years of Resolution 1325, which will be celebrated next year in 2025. And the fact that in the past, let's say 5 years, it has become more difficult for countries to include language on gender equality and women, peace and security and Security Council than we had seen previously. We witnessed very clear development of the agenda, especially until 2015, when UN Women published the global study on WPS, which became kind of a landmark study for the agenda. The fact that women's participation in peace negotiations improve peace agreements and make them more durable became kind of a flagship for all of us WPS defenders. But in the past 5 years, it's become more difficult to include language on that, and let alone approve new documents. So the last resolution passed in 2019, the last WPS resolution. It's been quite a while, and there's no clear indication of us of the Security Council having more documents on WPS. And yes, many of the people who study, the academics and the researchers who study the agenda have come to the conclusion that it has unfortunately become entangled in other conversations, and it has kind of become a bargaining chip for the polarization that we have witnessed in the Security Council due to other issues, very concrete issues as well. We should not, we should try and remember that the original ambition of the agenda was a pacifist one. So women who were advocating for WPS and gender equality in the Security Council, they were in the pacifist movement as well. They were asking for less militarization. And what we are unfortunately witnessing right now is an escalation of military conflicts. So I think it's part of the conversation as well. We're kind of moving away, unfortunately, in a very concrete way from the original ambitions of the agenda. And as you mentioned, Some people try and still today argue that it's a less important issue, right? But in fact, the quest for gender equality, as I mentioned in the beginning of our conversation, is enshrined as a principle of the United Nations in the Charter. And so WPS was actually the last of the concrete, if we will. It took more time for gender equality to be recognized by the Security Council as a legitimate agenda than it was in ECOSOC or in the General Assembly. So in the other pillars of the organization, it was much easier to recognize gender equality as a serious conversation than it was in the Security Council. And it has to do with men being the ones who usually have a voice in defense and security matters, right? So it's much more usual for member states to acknowledge the role of women in education, in care economy, in very many other aspects of international cooperation than it is in defense and security matters, disarmament, hard politic matters. So I think what we are witnessing today is it's, in my opinion, we should worry about this trend that it's become more acceptable to hear member countries putting gender equality in question in terms of its importance for the organization, right?
You mentioned also during our previous conversation that there was also this tendency of country members sometimes not realizing how important it is to send women to represent them in forums such as the Security Council or Disarmament Affairs here in Geneva, or anything related to peace and security more directly, right? It seems like country members need perhaps to be reminded. It's not only the United Nations itself that has also to make an effort in bringing greater equality in positions, high-ranked positions in disarmament and peace and security, but also country members, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. This is an integral part of the conversation. The reason why we have this tendency now is also because member states many times fail to realize the importance of gender equality in their own agencies. And so one simple example of that is that in the 75 General Assemblies, only 4 women have been presidents, right, of the General Assembly. And it is member countries who nominate their candidates to be the presidents. So it is also on the part of member countries and member states to give this agenda, the due credit. And it has everything to do also with the conversation on feminist foreign policy. It shouldn't be seen, Maya, in my opinion, as a concession or a favor. Member states need to acknowledge the contribution, the key contribution, the specific contribution that women bring to the table. We were talking about the global study of 2015, but there are many other studies who show that when women are involved in domestic politics, when they are in parliaments, when they are part of the judiciary in their home countries, they elevate, they increase the quality of public policy being made in their own countries. So it's not a matter of doing women a favor. It's the opposite. It's women as...
I read somewhere too that peacekeeping operations and also peace accords, and after peace is being brokered in some countries, there was also a tendency, I can't recall the exact name of the study, that seems that when women were participating in the peace process, peace lasted longer.
Yeah, that's the global study of 2015. Yeah, it was a compilation.
Right.
Yeah.
that points precisely to that it lasts longer too. So it's obviously not a favor or some sort of what they say sometimes icing on the cake, right? It's the very cake participation of women in peace and security. So
precisely.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for taking a moment to speak with the UN Brief. And where people can find the book, they can go to, I'll put the link in the story once I publish it in our newsletter, because I believe they can download the English edition, right? It's free to download the PDF, right, from the book, which is a great opportunity for everybody to catch up with what's happening in terms of women, peace and security agenda at the United Nations, at the Security Council.
Exactly, yes. The book is available for free download at the FONAGI website. And I'm very happy that we are being able to share this story, Maya. Very honored as a Brazilian diplomat to share a different perspective, a perspective from a country that is from the global south, and that has invested throughout UN history in peace, not in conflict, but in peace. And I think women are essential to this conversation. So thank you for this opportunity.